been in here, if you haven't heard, and they have raved and they love the George Burger. But this is sort of our first opportunity to have a program. So,
Very nice, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lapini, for being here. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith-Mumford. So, hi, thanks for coming. The first thing I need to tell you is that we're recording these. We're actually recording them all. Somebody had this amazing idea, I suppose, beginning of the year, that we do all of those. BATV is recording them. You have them up on your YouTube channel. Is that the way it works?
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is, but that's great. They have them up on their YouTube channel.
Or the website.
And they're available in that way. So they're recording all of these. So if you want to go back and see some of the others, they are there as well. So let me do this. I don't need the microphone, right? That's not normally a problem. Okay, good. Let me talk about 2 or 3 things, and then generally just open it up to questions for the rest of the hour. How's that? And those of you who've been to forums at other schools, I see at least one high school person here. Sorry for the repeat. So let me do this. Let me start out by talking about Park. And where's Dr. Smith-Mumford? Oh, thank you. So you're what grade levels? But is it a PBA or is it an end of the year? PBA. Okay. So some of you may have read some of this, but let me go through some of it anyhow. The State Board of Education voted to accept the commissioner's recommendation that Massachusetts field test this year Park, which to eventually, potentially replace MCAS. Park is not a Massachusetts-only assessment. It is part of a consortium of 18 states. I think there are still 18, although there were a few dropping out there for a while. But I believe there are 18 states. And what Massachusetts has set up to do in terms of piloting this is that this year they selected a number of school districts, schools within those districts, grade levels within those schools, and a certain number of classes within those grade levels to field test the test, meaning that we won't get scores, that the test is actually not scored. They are testing their test questions, much as we did with MCAS back in 1997, as I recall, is how we started this with MCAS. Next year, and by the way, we have a number of schools, in fact, it's every elementary school that for at least one grade level has been selected for the field test. Every elementary school, nothing at the high school. High school students in 10th grade still have to take the MCAS for the competency determination for graduation, that kind of thing. For 2014-2015, we as a district must choose whether we will participate in a second year of testing Park or whether we will participate in MCAS. At that point, the state board will make a decision as to whether Massachusetts is going to stay with MCAS or go to Park. So you heard it here first. I believe we're going to Park. Our commissioner serves as the chair of the board of Park. 2 or 3 of the main test developers at Park came from the Massachusetts Department of Education. So I think we're going to Park for 15-16 as the new assessment, and MCAS will be no more, except in science, interestingly enough, because there is no Park science exam. What does that mean to this year? So I sent you all a letter a while back, and that letter said that we, as I said earlier, we don't get scores for Park, but that as I examined the testing schedule for MCAS and for Park, I couldn't see why we would double test students in Park and MCAS. Now, I should say that there are 2 different Park tests. That's why I asked Dr. Smith-Mumford what we were doing. We're doing at this school in 8th grade, we're doing a performance-based assessment. That test is given at the same time as the MCAS, same testing window. If she had said to me, well, we're doing end of the year, Those are going to be done in late May into June. And you can't opt out of MCAS if you're only giving an end of the year assessment. So I have an option. And the option is for all of our students who are participating in PBAs, performance-based assessments, in the same window as MCAS, I can choose whether we're going to double test them in MCAS and in PARCC, or whether we're only going to administer PARCC. And I have to make that decision this week. And as I've told every other one of these forums that I've done, I don't believe we're going to double test. Which does mean for this school in 8th grade, you will not get a score. You will not get a score for either the English language arts or the math, whichever PARCC we're administering. Now, it's English language arts, so you will get a math score because the students will still take part in MCAS math. Okay, and that's true of every school in the district. And the reason for that is I had some people say, but I really want that score. I think that score is important. I want to have it. I do too. Except it's not as important as as the fact that we will lose all that instruction by the amount of testing that kids will go through for a month. So so I don't believe we're going to do it. And I'm going to make that decision again yet this week. In some schools, we're talking about 3rd, 4th, 5th. In one school, I think it's 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. 2 of the classes. Is it 2 classes here? Yeah, so the problem we have here, you have 4 sections? Yeah, you'll have 2 sections that'll be doing PARCC and 2 sections that'll be doing MCAS. And the 2 sections that are doing MCAS in English language arts will get scores. This is all very clear, huh? Yeah, right, exactly. And the 2 that are taking PARCC won't, okay? Again, I think if you saw the sort of the overlay of the testing sessions, you'd be as appalled as I was by the amount of testing that would have meant for students. And I just don't see why we would do it. So that's PARCC, and that's where I think we're headed in terms of that testing program down the road. As I said, the science exam remains in place, and in fact, the 10th grade test will remain in place, I think, until 2018, something like that. The MCAS, because they need it for graduation purposes and those kinds of things. So that's PARCC. Let me set that aside. You may want to ask a question on that. The second thing is really for me to have a chance to talk about the school committee decision off of the B-Space recommendation. Okay? Because I wouldn't know how to do one of these forums without talking about enrollment in space. As I've said to a couple groups today where I've started to talk to them about this plan that we've started to put together, you know about half the story, right? You know the half of the story, probably, that says that the school committee looked at the B-Space recommendation and made a decision, right? And the decision says that we will do a project at Devotion School, that we actually petitioned the Massachusetts School Building Authority to make that project larger. They've approved that. So that project is now approved for 1,010 students, 5 sections per grade level. Okay? That we will next look to put a statement of interest in for the Driscoll School. And that we will put in that proposal as a 4-section per grade level school that'll be right around 800 students. That while we're doing that, we will turn our attention to the high school, and we will figure out over the course of this year, with the help of a consultant who's going to work with the headmaster and me, what that means to build for a high school of 2,500 students. Or do we need to look at another option? Will that property simply not work for the academic program that we want to have in place? We don't know. I can give you all the reasons in the world why I don't think that property works for 2,500. And it starts with some of the sketches that the architect who we've had in already has done for us. But it could very well be that it does, right? We have to work to determine that. And that takes us till about 2021. About 2021. What I love about this part of the program is to watch people figure out where their kids are in grades. Doing the math, right? Some people going like this. Good, not me. Others saying what? So that's half the story. I don't even get out beyond 2021 when their decision also takes into account what we might do here beyond 2021. But that's only half the story, because the other half of the story is how do we, so the devotion project is slated to be done in 2018-ish. They're all squishy at this point, right? October-ish. The Driscoll project would be slated to be done around September of 2018. But the question is, how do we get to 2018? Because we don't get there in the same configurations at the same schools that we're doing right now. It's impossible. It doesn't work. Okay? So what I'm charged with doing and will do before the end of this month is to provide the school committee with a set of recommendations around how we get there, how the old Lincoln fits into that, what grade levels of what schools we might need to move out for a 3-year period, 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, in order to get there. And how we're going to make all that work, right? So that's the recommendation they'll have that I hope they act on in January, right? The building department wishes I had given them that recommendation 3 months ago, because they want to start doing the $3 million of work that we have at the old Lincoln. And they'd like to know what grade levels are going in there before they start doing that work. Because as they've reminded me, if I'm recommending that we move kindergartners, and I'm not, that would look different than if I were recommending that we move 7th and 8th graders, which is more likely. Okay? That's the part that got left out of the B-space discussion. And the school committee's decision is, how do we get there? Now, I'll tell you one school where there will be grade levels taken from. This is a major surprise. Don't tell anyone. Devotion. Why devotion? Because we're going to do the devotion project with kids in the building, because there's no swing space large enough. All of the designs that we've looked at so far, designs, consider that a very rough use of the word design. All of those designs assume kids in the building and building around and then moving kids to other parts of the building as we build it. But they also all assume that not all 9 grades will be there. So I have to move some of the grade levels out, right? Another likely school in some of that is Driscoll. Again, Driscoll's the same kind of project. It can be done. It has to be done with kids in the building, but they can't all be there, so we may have to relocate some of them. And I will say to you that this school is another likely candidate for that, because you can't make it to 2018 till the space is created in other parts of town. This school simply doesn't make it to 2018 without some intervention. So I'm planning to make that set of recommendations to the capital subcommittee of the school committee sometime around the middle of this month. And I hope that the school committee will act on it in January. And the reason is that I need them to act on it in January, because that's when I need to start implementing it. If I'm going to have a school that's opening in 2015, 2016, I need to hire the principal of that school for next year so that they can get that school ready to open over the course of next year. So you might want to talk about that. The third thing is just really the whole override discussion, and I hope I'm hitting on some of the questions that I was sent. So, so we've given the override study committee 2, besides the building project, which is enough, by the way, right? So these building projects right now are projected in very round terms at a devotion school of $100 million, 40% reimbursable by the state. A Driscoll project of around $40 million, 40% reimbursable by the state, we hope. We hope. And a high school project, which right now is being pegged at $60 million, but I'm going to stand here and tell you that that's way too low. It's not even close. So some part of that might have to be part of the override discussion. It might not be able to be done out of the capital plan. It would have to be done as part of a debt exclusion. The voters would have to vote to authorize it. But the other 2 pieces that we've given them to pay attention to is what is the staffing necessary for those schools down the road. So we've given it to them in a couple of chunks. The first piece is what do we need with the growth that's going to occur over the next X number of years, whether that's high school staffing, which by the way is where most of it's, if you see the plan, which we have up online if you want to see it. A lot of it's high school staffing. So we've got numbers in there. We've also got elementary classroom teachers. But then we get to the second part of it, which is really, I think, the most important part, and that is how do we begin to make up for the areas that we're short in now, right? So what we did, very simply, was we went back in most of those areas and we looked at the national sort of norms for those areas, right? What do the professional associations say about staffing for guidance counselors at the elementary level, at the middle level? And how short are we from that? And how would we get to that point over a 1 or 2 or 3 year period of time? So we've given them that. And it probably doesn't surprise you that some of those ratios are way off. Way off. And it probably doesn't surprise you that the price tag is pretty steep on that. So the Override Study Committee, the school committee, have some really serious issues to look at with us over the next couple of months, because the price tag on all of this, given the growth that we've had, is rather steep. And all I would say to you is if any of this interests you at all, you really ought to be paying attention to the discussions of the Override Study Committee. I mean, there are, and let me say it this way, so I'm not accused of saying something else. Rightfully so, there are people on the Override Study Committee who are questioning our core beliefs. They are questioning why we belong to METCO. They are questioning why we have a program for our staff that allows them to send their children here if they don't reside here. They are questioning why we don't charge rentals for rental space for more organizations that use our spaces. Okay? I'm not saying I agree with any of these things, but I don't think they're wrong to ask the questions. I'll fight you all day long on the materials fee. I'll tell you why you as residents get a huge benefit out of that program. I'll defend METCO all day long, but I don't think it's wrong for them to be asking the questions, right? But that's the phase that we're in with them right now, is there's a lot of questions being asked that could drive some pretty serious changes to the school system. And what I don't want, because I know this is what will happen, is for people to come forward in February and March and say, why didn't you all tell us this was happening? We're telling you. They meet far too often, right, Mr. Moore? They meet a lot. And their calendar is up on the town's website. Override Study, it spells out all their meetings. There are 2 main school subcommittees that you ought to be paying attention to. And Wednesday night, the entirety of the Override Study Committee meets, and we're presenting the last piece of what we want to put before them, which is our vision of where technology should be in the classroom in this school system. It's a $2.5 million package that we're putting in front of them that we believe takes us to where we need to be in terms of the infusion of technology in teaching and learning in this system, because it is so woefully inadequate right now. It also, and it includes a vision of a bring your own device, of a one-to-one program at Brookline High School. So if you want to see that, that will be up on our website on Thursday morning as well. So that's probably enough, huh? Is that a good start? So there may be some, you know what, let me check these questions just to make sure that I've answered the ones that are appropriate for me to answer here within these. Thank you for doing this, whoever put these together. Not many times I get questions ahead of time, which is really cool. I'll talk about Landmark a little later on. If I don't, remind me, that's the question about the binder that someone asked. Override, I've talked a little bit about that. Enrollment, after school programming. The only thing I'll say about that, which I'll say here, is in our building projects to date, both Heath and Runkle, we've built dedicated space for extended day. So the person who says to me, you know, so where's the commitment of the superintendent? Don't quite ask it this way, but right there. I mean, we've built dedicated space for after-school programming, even though the Massachusetts School Building Authority doesn't reimburse on those kind of spaces. Is that ridiculous? But they don't reimburse on after-school program spaces. Testing, I think I answered if I didn't beat that enough. And I'm going to duck, Mr. Morse, you'll like this question. If you could, this is Mr. Alan Morse, who's my school committee chair. If you could go back and refine the B-Space process, Brookline experience, what would you have changed? I'm going to wait till Mr. Morse leaves and then I'll answer that question. What would you like to ask? Is it the room that's so intimidating? It's a great room, huh? Yes. Thank you so much.
This is not the first time I've asked this question, but I understand.
Probably won't be the last
and
either.
It probably won't be the last. I understand that looking long term, you're looking at some of the. You've been very clear about putting priorities in keeping teachers in the classroom to keep class sizes low, and so you have not been able to keep up the demand on the other side of the house, your admin, your guidance, your support, as you talked about, and looking at what that future staffing plan looks like. But that's putting us out. Assuming that all goes well and we get the money to do what your plan suggests, that puts us out a couple years. Do we have any short-term innovative plans to help our current staff? I mean,
it doesn't necessarily put us out a couple of years. I mean, what we've done for now is just proposed a sort of a glomming together of dollars, right? That say, this is what it would cost to take us to standard in areas like guidance, nursing, vice principals, et cetera. And you won't be surprised to know that well, it impacts actually every school, but it has some pretty significant impact here. I mean, a school of these numbers, you know, we believe, we've proposed in that model, you know, that a devotion of 1,000 has a principal and 3 vice principals. Or maybe we look at the configuration very differently and it has an upper school principal, right, and a lower school principal, maybe. We have all those things to look at, but we think we've budgeted for them in this plan. I mean, a school of this size is 1 and 2, right? A principal and 2, or if you look at it differently, you have some options to do that. We've used the national ratios for things like nursing and guidance, et cetera. If we're given an invitation to look at those things more closely, we have ways of proposing that they can be implemented over a 2 or 3 year period, which actually would get us started. Could get us started as soon as next year or the following year. In the meantime, what we've tried to do is, we put into place this year a new evaluation system, and that new evaluation system, you know, I think is terrific, and I think it actually betters what the state has put into place in many, many ways. But we said right from the beginning, it was work heavy on the people doing the evaluating, right? So we have more coordinators involved in more aspects of evaluation than we've even had before. Those are the kind of supports that we're able to put in place for now. Yeah.
So you said this project would be 2018-ish. So devotion is going to increase until up to like 1,000. This will be 100. So what does that mean to existing students that are on buffer zone? Do you move everybody, or
Yeah.
so
it's a good question. So let me give 2 answers to that I hope are consistent. The first is that we still have to figure that out, right? I mean, I have quite a bit of experience with redistricting in another community that some people are familiar with, and what we tried to do there was to phase it in with new students, right, and not have it happen to existing students. It's going to be a little bit more difficult with certain schools here to do that. One of the simulations that we're trying to run before I put anything out is a simulation that takes a student in a grade level at a school, a second grader at the peer school, who lives at address X, and runs them through what the next 10 years of their schooling career could look like as we do something possibly with certain grade levels in this building, possibly utilize that space at Driscoll to redistrict them. Then they go to the high school, and the high school is split. Now, part of it is at Old Lincoln and being renovated. I mean, so I've said this to people. First of all, we're gonna run that simulation. Second of all, I'm not sure I can do anything to correct it, right? I mean, I'm not gonna promise something I can't promise. I'm not gonna say to you, we're gonna make sure that doesn't happen to that child. I can't. What I can do is take steps to minimize it, but my definition of minimizing it and your definition may not end up being the same. Some kids are gonna be in the middle of renovations in their elementary school, just in time to be moved to Old Lincoln, just in time to be back at Old Lincoln as a high schooler and be involved in a 2 or 3 year renovation. Some kids are going to experience that. And to tell you otherwise, I wouldn't be telling you the truth.
But will you consider, how you could, for a school district kind of position,
Right.
Will you consider that?
Of course, we'll do anything we can, because I do have some experience with this. We'll do anything we can, as long as there's room, to minimize it and to let kids finish their careers at certain places. We'll do everything we can to minimize that. I'll be honest with you and tell you that we haven't even started to look at that yet, because right now we're trying to get the Devotion Building Committee up and running, right? We're trying to get that project started.
That would be your kind of.
Yeah, no, well, unless I'm at Devotion.
Okay, so you
Get
would
started,
say,
yeah.
on calculation, that would
No.
be my daughter's like 7th grade year, and then she would be in this school for like 8 years already.
Oh, she'll be fine. No, well, that deal comes into my office, I'll bet you will. That's the kind of simulation that we need to run. That's exactly the kind of simulation that we need to run. And we're committed to doing that. Yes, sir.
So my question is regarding the various stages of projects like Devotion, you mentioned Driscoll. I'm kind of summing up numbers in my head. It sounds like it could be $250, $300 million or so needed to fund these. How much of that money, if any, is kind of in the bag already to get things going, and how much needs to be actually voted for and approved by voters before any of these
Yeah.
things can be
It's
considered?
a good question. The answer is it depends. So I'm not going to try to speak for the deputy town administrator, because the capital improvement plan is the part of this that he does. But he's run scenarios where we've considered Devotion as a debt exclusion, meaning it has to go to the voters, or where we've run it as part, since that's the first project, or where we do it out of the capital improvement plan, and then watched the fallout from there. So one scenario we've spent more of our time on than others recently is Devotion as a debt exclusion, Driscoll as part of the capital improvement plan, and then depending on what the high school costs in 2018, 2019, we'd make a decision on that somewhere down the road. So there is the possibility here, depending on those enrollments, of up to 2 of those projects being successful vote dependent.
Is there a general feeling right now, like a sort of bellwether feeling of how voters are feeling about approving that kind of money?
I think, so the best way for me to, so let me say one thing before I answer that, which is, disclaimer I always have to give, I've probably done this before. So I'm not actually allowed to advocate for overrides. Superintendents get fined by the election commission for doing that kind of thing. So, I'm trying to answer factual questions if I can, right? And not sound like I'm advocating for certain questions to be on the ballot or things like that. Okay. So, no, what I'll tell you is that I know the Override Study Committee is trying to pay close attention to a total package, because there are certain levels that many members of that group don't believe we can go above and be successful. So they're trying to pay attention to what those numbers are, and whether certain other, and I don't like this word, but whether certain other things can be accomplished through efficiencies or other ways of raising revenue, right? So I'll give you one example. I gave you a couple of rental spaces, those kinds of things. There are certain programs on the town side that I know they're taking a close look at to see whether there are additional dollars available out of those programs that could be committed to this before we start looking at tax overrides. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess
Yeah, I don't have a great answer to it right now. Yes, sir.
So, just thinking very locally and knowing that I didn't understand about a third of what you said because I haven't been as steeped in these
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
you do it, Mom. I just haven't been paying attention and knowing what I was going to ask what you talked about. So the earliest kids from Pierce could have any obvious interruption, like leaving the room or leaving the district of Bristol, would be when.
So I believe that we will open the old Lincoln School as something.
Okay.
Just for example purposes, let's say 7th and 8th grade, out of certain of our elementary schools in 2015, 2016. Okay? I believe that whoever that is will be there for 3 years. Doesn't mean those kids will be there for 3 years because it's only 2 grade levels, right? They won't be there for 3 years. And I believe that after that, again, we're trying to build flexibility into this plan because one thing we know is we'll say devotion opens in October of 18 and it won't. Right? That we know. What we're trying to do is build flexibility in, but we know we have a date when we have to have more space available for the high school, and that's 2019. We're right up against it. 2019, we don't believe we can any longer hold the student population that will be there in that building. So we have to have some other spaces available by then. Yes?
So with that scenario with 7-8 for a couple of years going to open.
As one example for discussion purposes only.
Okay, so one,
Excellent.
would that affect any of the MSBA reimbursement that we receive because we're K-8?
Oh, not as a temporary.
Okay.
Not as a temporary. So the question is, so I have a lovely little letter from the MSBA over on my desk where they said, what? We heard you guys are talking about doing something other than K through 8, and given that we just reimbursed on 2 projects, Runkle and Heath, for K to 8, we're kind of wondering what you're doing, right? So we'd like to know what you're doing. And we had to explain to them that we had to go through this process to make decisions. And the question was, if even on a temporary basis, you move something out of one of our K to 8s to another place, and therefore those schools are only K to 6 for 3 years, will that jeopardize your MSBA reimbursement? Not if you show it's part of your long-term plan to get to whatever. So in this whole scenario I've laid out, before we start talking about what might happen to this building, it's now 2021. And we finished Brookline High School. How about that? We're in there in September of 2021. So that's the end of that scenario, we think. And of course that will slip.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good segue then, because that's my question at least about the teacher Pierce.
Yeah.
I'll admit that I followed the BSpace discussion conversations over the summer.
Did you have a colored t-shirt? Sorry.
I followed mainly online over the summer, and I'll admit that in the last 2 or 3 months I haven't followed it. But last I left off, there was a lot of discussion about Pierce renovations, either major renovations or knocking the whole thing down and building Pierce where the playground is, or stuff like that. And then I lost track of what happened.
Right, so you didn't miss much.
Yeah,
eh?
can you
That's
tell
good.
us
You didn't miss much
what's
because
still on the table and
that's
what
still
are
the
the
conversation is what will that be? And I don't think many have bothered with it much at all because it is beyond that high school project. It is at least mentioned in the capital improvement plan, but it's not much more than a mention at this point. You know, there have been some people suggest that that we should have done this project instead of the Driscoll project. And the problem with that line of thinking is that you can't reasonably, in terms of the architects who we had look at it, you can't get the space necessary here. I mean, you know, the proposal would have had to be, let's take the Pierce School to over 1,000 kids. Let's make it devote. It'd be a 5-section per school. And while we've done some designs on this that we've looked at over the years, most of them, when building off of this building, tend to be awkward at best, if not downright undoable. And so there's still this idea floating out there, is this really a renovation and addition, or is it a knockdown and a new building? And given that scenario, it had to come at when all this is over, when these pieces are over and we have the space in place.
So the ideas are still floating around
Yes.
after 2021.
And they will be for a while, given the pretty ambitious agenda that we have ahead of us for the next number of years. Yeah.
So my question is about predicting enrollment at Pierce. I know it's challenging for you, but when I started, we were a 3-section school. We're now a 4-section school with a 5-section in kindergarten. That 5-section kindergarten, I assume, will move to first grade next year. Do you see us taking in 5 sections in kindergarten again?
So it's really early. Let me say this: we always make assumptions through this part of the budget process that we're about to start. That if we're projecting a similar number of students, and we are, we project that the kindergartens will be in exactly the same place that they were the year before, and that always proves to be wrong. Right? But it's the best we can do for this time of the year until we start to see numbers. We make those adjustments later on. The other thing that we start to do through December and January is to figure out whether we actually have room to do that. Right? Is there actually room in the building, given the multitude of things that we might try to create space, to actually have that number of kindergartens with an advancing number of first grades. And you're right, the assumption has to be that the number of first grades stays the same. So we're a couple months away from doing that. And you know, last year I said actually a couple months ago, I said to the devotion parents, we came within 2 days this year of exercising a new school committee policy for the first time. School committee policy now says that I have the authority to take a class that is I'll talk about this building, that is a Pierce class, and move it to another school. Okay? Even if those kids live within the core. Okay? Because I needed that flexibility. 2 years ago, we asked them for that flexibility. We knew we were going to need it down the road, and it came within 2 days of happening at Devotion with the kindergarten. We were going to move it to Driscoll. I told both schools that story since, and we ended up not doing it because we reconfigured the sections in another grade level, reduced by 1 here, so we could add 1 here, and we were able to do them within what they had. That's not going to be the end of the conversation about that policy. That policy will be exercised, if not next year, the year after. We will end up with and people said, well, what will happen? Well, we'll bus. We'll have to. I mean, it will be difficult. But if people won't move where I have room, that's my only option. And they just won't move where I have room. I saw this problem, I don't know if you saw it in the paper, Wellesley claims to have an enrollment problem. Except if you read the article, they don't really have an enrollment problem. They have an enrollment problem at certain schools problem. Right? So they have schools that are overcrowded, and they have schools where they have space. And that's not an enrollment, that's the kind of problem I'm talking about that we've had some of, but we have even at the schools where I'm identifying that we have a classroom or two of space, it means moving out pre-Ks. I've been in this room for that conversation with the early ed group, and that's a lovely conversation, right? Yeah. So and we'll end up doing that again. We have pre-Ks at Driscoll. We'll end up moving them out. I think we're actually moving some of them out next year. Then we have to worry about the pre-Ks that are at the high school. They're going to have to move out. That's how we're going to create the space for the numbers that are going to move into the high school over the next few years. So we have to do those things to try to make it work. I did a lousy job of answering your question, but that's all I have right now, which is we'll budget as if we have this. Then we'll talk to Piper and say, where might we reconfigure space? And we have, I mean, I get from some people's perspective that it's a big issue, and they'd rather, they don't think we've done such an amazing job of it. I will say, just from the person who sits in this chair, that the work Charlie Simmons has been able to do to create classes to have kids stay in the building have been miraculous, incredible, to create classrooms where classrooms didn't exist. Yeah.
So I think in the public conversations about how to deal both immediately and long term with the enrollment crunch, it's always been within the context of how do we how do we deal with these issues while not losing the aspects of schooling and public schooling in Brookline that make people want to move here,
Right.
the things that we see as excellence.
Right.
And I think that was at least one part of the push for staying with a K through 8 model. And I heard
agree.
one school committee member said to me that there was such parent support for the K through 8 model that this person was surprised that parents were so traditional and not interested in innovative aspects
Did you
of
say
schooling.
traditional? Okay.
Not interested in innovations in schooling and education, which I thought was actually conflating two different issues. So I wonder, in the process that the town is in now of trying to plan out the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, if there's any conversation or questions being asked about how we might reconceive what education looks like, either in some elementary or in general and elementary or at the high school, that could possibly also help us with space issues without losing excellence. So just as two, and this is something that I haven't thought about, so I have no idea it would work. I'm not saying that it would work, but just for example, at Pierce, I think we always talk about trying to take the open space we have and turn it as much as possible into working traditional classroom spaces. Do we ever ask, well, what are the possibilities for what we can do with the fact that we have all of these joining spaces together? And maybe it's like the override committee, that none of them are questions that any of us would support, but it seems like they're questions that are worth asking. Or for example, at the high school, if we have a couple of hundred too many kids per year, what if we thought about the possibilities of a section of those students being off campus for internships or some other kind of play spaces? I mean, is there any kind of conversation like that going on as we try to figure out the immediate needs of space?
So I think some of it's based in that technology discussion and the technology plan. Again, you take a look at the video that they've put together and the presentation they're going to make Wednesday night. I think you'll find bits and pieces of it in there. I don't understand what you said up front about the K-8 and this issue though, and I'm with you. I don't see those as related necessarily at all, quite frankly.
Let me just say that I actually don't expect you to answer the question.
No,
I think
I'm-
what I just want to say is that there might, within all of the difficulty of trying to deal with rising enrollments and building issues, it might also be an interesting opportunity to say, what are the kinds of questions and conversations we might have about how to think differently about excellent education in Brookline that could also be useful in thinking about space issues. It might be an opportunity.
Yeah, yes, okay. And I will think about it some more. I mean, we've had some of those conversations. I know where at least one school committee member would be coming from on this, because we had some discussions earlier at a school committee meeting where they were talking about some of the work that they were seeing, and they were talking about classrooms of 40 students, with some students on terminals doing problems that way, and they did get rather glassy looks from people who they were speaking to about that. So I don't think here there's a great appetite for that. I don't. In some ways, nor do I think there should be. I mean, we've used some spaces, I think, wisely to create programs for kids. I mean, I think it doesn't fall exactly into what you're saying, but the partnership that we created with BATV that led to us getting a lab for students. I know some people said up front, Brookline kids won't be interested in those kind of careers, aren't interested in more vocational programs. Then how come every animation class I run is oversubscribed? And how come that TV studio is used all the time? And we now have kids who are looking at careers in those kinds of majors. So we created something very different for kids, and quite frankly, it cost us a 0.5 staff member in partnership with BATV. 0.5 staff member. So I think there's more of those kinds of things we can do. I will say I do sense a move. It's a slow move, I'm really pleased with the technology plan we're putting in front of the override study committee that we've already talked with the school committee about. And I will tell you that 6 years ago at the school committee level, 6 to 8 years ago, we could barely get an audience for a technology plan. There was not an so back to that traditional kind of view, there was barely an appetite for that kind of discussion and what we might be able to do. We fought really hard to make sure that the technology aspect stayed in the Runkle project. When there are people that thought we could use the money for other aspects of that project, we fought really hard to make sure that was going to happen. Those same kinds of proposals will be in the schools to follow. So I think that's a move in the direction, but I'll think more about what you've asked me. Yes.
Speaking of allocation of resources, you outlined
Was I
obviously-
doing?
Yeah, you were. Operating budget needs, capital budget needs. There's also an infusion of private resources that come into the school
Yep.
district, not the least of which come from parents who contribute to a PTO.
Yep.
And we just had our most successful fundraising drive, in terms of participation in this building ever. So feeling really good about it. Do you want to talk at all about any shifts that you see in terms of priorities for the use of those private PTO resources to enhance and supplement the teaching and learning that happens in this building? I know historically there's been a pretty bright line about what is and isn't appropriate for private resources in the school department. Do you see any of that shifting in any ways given these budget pressures?
So, whether it's the Education Foundation, the PTOs, the 21st Century Fund, Community Foundation, I hope we're moving that line out here, and let me tell you what I mean by that. So, because we've had a lot of discussions at those meetings over the last couple of years about technology in particular. And I hope that with this plan, we're moving away from PTOs needing to be involved in what I'll call the basics, right? The core. That this plan provides the core for each teacher in every building and every classroom. And that what we're able then is to present an opportunity to PTOs, to the Ed Foundation, to be more involved in an innovation agenda, right? So what we've done in that plan is set aside X amount of dollars per year, which we would love to have someone supplement, right? To ask teachers to innovate and share with their colleagues, to use that technology, right, in innovative ways that they learn about from others, that they model from other districts, that they've been working on, had an interest in working on themselves, and then share with their colleagues in hopes that those then that the good ones go to scale across the district. We've built in some seed money for that into this plan, but when we first talked about this plan, I said that's the right area for our partners, for private funders. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have a 7th grader, and I understand that that's one of the first big classes, maybe the 7th grade. Or
It is.
grade. So
Congratulations.
he'll be in high school, I guess, before the high school is renovated and even before Lincoln is used. So I'm wondering how are you going to handle all the kids in the high school for that period of time? You know, what's going to change there?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me. We're at around 1,800 students now. It's about 2018 or 2019 till we get to the point where we have a real crunch. Again, I forget what that exact number is. Until then, we are doing a similar kind of study that we did at each of the elementary schools, only we're doing it in a more formal way. That is to try to identify the spaces that are available that are not presently used as classrooms, right? High school classrooms, and convert them. So we believe, there's a lot of argument about what the number is that we can get to by doing that. But there's some number of students we can hold if we move the pre-Ks out of the high school. If we move adult education out of the high school. If we move, the BEEP office that goes with the pre-Ks, right? If we have a room right now that's dedicated to the Sagamore newspaper. There are no classes held in there. It's just dedicated to the student newspaper. It won't be during your son's time at Brookline High School. There's a room downstairs, a very nice room we call the alumni room. In 3 years, we'll call it a classroom.
But it's not just
Right.
a space issue, it's just sort of more broadly, you know, just, I don't know how to say it, there's teams.
No, until 2018 or so, it will be a space issue. Now,
Well, I know
beyond
it's a
that,
space issue,
pardon?
but beyond, I just meant in addition
Right,
to
beyond
space.
that is what we're bringing in, I mentioned earlier, what we're bringing in that consultant to work with us on is what does this look like? I mean, even at Devotion, we're using a consultant to tease out how do we take a school of 1,000 students and make it feel smaller, right? And there are lots of, there are some ways to do that, and there are some people, one we're working with in particular, who's done this kind of work with a number of school districts, in terms of taking that space and really paying attention to what you're trying to achieve there, not just building boxes. That's the long term at Brookline High School, and that's why we're bringing these people on to help us look at how do we program it. The problem with the sketches that we've had done to date, which I don't think are public, they may be. I hope they're not, but they may be, is that they're just boxes. And quite frankly, I wouldn't send my kids to them, right? It's not a school. There are enough classrooms, but it's not a school. And it makes some assumptions about program. For example, you know, we have a pretty healthy dance program at Brookline High School. It takes away almost all the dance studios. Really? So now we're going to make programmatic decisions based on what we can build? I think that's actually backward, right? So, so we have all that work to do with them. That said, in the meantime, up through the start of that project, it's going to be about creating enough spaces for classes, just as it's been at the elementary schools up until now. Yeah.
So in addition to the magic that you do in classrooms, how about common areas?
Yeah, we don't do magic with common areas.
I
I'm
know.
sorry.
So
Charlie's magic wand doesn't work on the common areas.
So I wonder if you
Um,
could, I don't know.
So the common areas in every elementary school are, even where we've congratulated ourselves over and over again for the classroom spaces that we've created, we've been pushed on common spaces in every one of our schools. And that's going to happen at the high school as well. It may mean different ways of scheduling.
Well, I guess I was actually, since I'm a seventh grader,
Yeah.
more, I mean, I'm at the high school, somehow will figure itself out, I imagine, like every school, but I guess I was more concerned about peers.
But that's even happened at the elementary schools. I mean, a number of elementary principals, including this one, have figured out ways to move the schedule around, to play with the schedule, to try to accommodate large groups, right, to make them move at different times and those kinds of things. I'm hearing for that from principal after principal as sort of short-term strategies for dealing with this. And they're going to have to continue to do it. Hi, how are you?
Good. I came late, so I apologize if this has
Okay.
already been addressed. With Pierce at the epicenter of the increase in enrollment
Yes.
and the increase in classrooms happening at other schools, presumably there are going to be families who made housing decisions trying to come to Pierce who are going to be moved to other schools, sort of by mathematics. Have you thought about policies of grandfathering, say, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, such that adolescents won't be pulled away from their friends as this transition has occurred? And I would think that a strategy like that would not only be good educationally, but would probably help in terms
Right.
of override votes.
So I think that's exactly what we'll have to do. I think that's exactly how we'll have to approach it. I did say something about this earlier. That's okay though. About really looking at how we are able to allow as many students as possible to finish their career at a school that they started at and do the redistricting in grades below that, except where, and what I had happen in Beverly when we did that was parents made some decisions based on the fact that they not only had a 7th grader, but they had a 2nd grader. And so they could make some decisions. They could allow the 7th grader stay, move the 2nd grader, or they could move both. Their choice, not mine. And we created a lot of goodwill by doing that, by putting that back in families' hands. And I think we can do some of that. will be a little bit more limited because that was just a simple close a school redistrict. It was a simpler close a school redistrict. This is really about bursting out of classrooms. But I think the strategy that you suggested of looking at upper grades, however many of those upper grades we can grandfather, and redistricting kids as they enter would be our best bet.
Is there a risk to the BEAT program long term?
Is there a risk to the BEAT program long term? Not as long as I'm here.
So they just get moved.
Yeah, I mean, what we've said is that, and I can actually put a date to it now, that through 2021, right, we're going to be in lots of places. We're right now renting properties in 2 locations, and we are always looking for additional properties to rent when we exhaust those. We actually have some flex space at these 2 properties for next year, but it could very well be that we'll be renting space in more than 2 down the road. Someone said to me recently, to your question, what if the bottom drops out of this enrollment? What if you're all wrong? What if it isn't an average of 600 kids a year? And I said that would be terrible because that would allow us to move our early ed classes back into our K-8s where they belong. Wouldn't that be awful? Anything else before I go? Yes? Oh, you asked the landmark question. Yeah. So it's a great question. So the question was, I'm so sorry. So the question was, at the Driscoll School, and by the way, I'd add the Lawrence School and now the Baker School, which gives me part of the answer to your question, right? They have a binder homework system. They have implemented to great success. Thank you so much for saying that. In their middle grade students, and it has been exceptionally successful at all 3 of those places. Baker's just in the midst of starting it, and it is work with Landmark, the private school Landmark, consultants of theirs who we've brought in. Started that work at Lawrence a number of years ago, and yes, the plan is some number of schools each year down the road. It's a 3-year set of work with the school. It isn't just middle level. It starts out in a grade, the reason it's 3 years is it starts out in a grade span, principal's choice, principal and staff's choice. Lawrence started it, the work in 4, 5, 6. Rick Rogers, I love to quote him on this, said he knew he had something great on his hands when by mid-year his 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers were clamoring for it. Said, why not? Why didn't you pick us? What did we do wrong? And so then we did it over 3 years, and we moved to Driscoll, and then we just started at Baker. And it's funding. It's not cheap. It's very expensive professional development, and it's more than worth it. Yeah, that's okay. It is a notebook homework system, and it's a system of teaching kids to organize. I mean, that's what Landmark does better than I think anyone. And this is sort of the regular ed professional development arm of Landmark. And some people hear Landmark and say, well, that must be a great special education strategy. The great thing about this professional development and the work that teachers do in working with kids around their organization skills is that I've had parents of regular education students come and tell me this is the best professional development we've ever done, and I've had parents of students who are on IEPs come and say the same thing to me. If you can get that in my seat, you buy into that work forever. So it's been very successful, and I imagine I'll have principals clamoring for who gets to go next.
So the education of the teaching staff?
The work that the consultants do is with the teaching staff, and with their classes. So they do, and the staff members in those grade levels do an awful lot of a consultant model, and they do an awful lot of peer observation and peer work. So the great thing about this professional development, from my point of view, is that it's all school-based, and most of it's done in your classroom. You aren't pulled out necessarily; it's done in your classroom. How about one more, and then I'll go. Oh, yes, sir.
So, how did the group arrive at $3 million upgrade renovation to the school?
That's a really great question. The answer to the second question, to that last question, is probably no. Right? There will, I believe there will most certainly need to be things done even between the elementary and the high school work or projects, right? It was never intended to bring, so all during the B space, people would say, $3 million to bring Old Lincoln up to the standard to be the 9th elementary school. No, $3 million to bring Old Lincoln up to a standard to open it as swing space for 3 to 5 years. Even to that, your point is correct. It barely does that, right? It barely does that, but it'll work. It'll work, and I do believe we have some additional dollars available to us if we need them. What they need to know now is what they're doing, right? I mean that's the key part. You know, Chuck, the magician, is saying to me, I need to know what we're doing. Well, so if you look back through past capital improvement plans, however, you'll see considerable work done to boilers, to windows, to elevator at the Old Lincoln. So this isn't the only three. There's an accumulation of dollars. There are some town meeting members who every time something comes up about Old Lincoln still say, I thought we were going to sell that building, right? And here you guys go every year pouring more money into it. It's become a very valuable resource. I've said to many groups before, I've had more calls, 5, which is a lot, from colleagues over the past X number of years who've said, would you rent us that school? I mean, Dan wouldn't mind if I said, Dan Gudenkantz from Needham about 2 or 3 years ago, who said, you know, would you rent us the Old Lincoln School? I said, you're going to bus kids here from Needham. Yeah, that's how tight it is to find swing space. We would consider doing that. Swing space is very valuable, and districts don't have it.
But didn't they just use that space for Rumble like 4 years ago? Did they need more construction for it?
It needs.
Rumble was there for 2 years.
I would say to you that yes, it needs work. Yes, it needs regular, ongoing work, because remember, unlike the other schools, it doesn't have a regular, ongoing maintenance plan. So putting $3 million into it after someone was there 3 years ago, actually it's only a year and a half or so, they only moved back last October, is right, I think. And again, it would be more depending on the grade span that we were talking about putting in. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.